afternoon. What's going on? Thad Brown here with you on the Endgame. It is Thursday, September the 25th. It is 3 days before a titanic matchup between the Buffalo Bills and the New Orleans Saints. And by titanic, I mean it's more likely to sink than swim. Here with you on Rochester First. The kids, of course, they all refer to it as Rock One. It is an hour full of sports talk today. We're going to start with Bills stuff, talk about some Saints. And then I want to talk about a couple other issues that I think are a little less about who wins and loses an NFL game and about things that are maybe a bit more important, some of them. Number one, Sean McDermott had a moment yesterday that I'm going to show you a little later on, and I want to use that as an example of how he has grown, how he has become a better person. So we'll get into that today. Baseball playoffs about to start. The colors behind me are based on that. I'll explain that later on. But I have never been a huge fan of the playoffs, at least not the last 20 years or so. I will explain why. And more important, we'll talk a little bit about why those playoffs might be looking a whole lot different going forward because of the new world of media. But like I said, let's start with the Bills and the matchup with the Saints this week. And let me tell you, look, there's not a whole lot that I can sit here and say that will make you fear or worry about a Bills loss to the Saints. The Saints just aren't very good. They came into the season as the team that everybody thought would be the worst in the NFL. I don't know if they've looked like the worst in the NFL. I mean, there are other 0-3 teams, Jets, Dolphins maybe, who you can put up there and say may have in total seemed like a worse team. But the Saints are very much in the mix after 3 games. They lost 2 at home to open the season, got pummeled by Seattle last week in a game that was 21-0 before the first quarter was over, and just went downhill from there. Now, when you look at the Saints team, they do have some players. I mean, if you're a fantasy owner, you probably are well aware of multiple Saints players. I mean, Alvin Kamara still looks like Alvin Kamara. Shifty, elusive, a guy who can hit a hole, make some plays. Their yards per rush is not very good, and their run game in whole doesn't look very good. But Alvin Kamara still looks like a guy that you need to fear. So, he can play. On the outside, Chris Olave, when he's healthy, is probably still a top 20 receiver and a guy that, very much needs to be accounted for. Not someone, this isn't Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson that can totally take over a game by himself, but he's a guy who can play in the league and play at a pretty high level. On the other side, Rashid Shaheed, essentially their deep threat, has the speed to threaten. We've talked about how good the Bills' offense is at times and what they lack when it comes to a deep threat or a down-the-field threat. Well, the Saints have it in Shaheed. And a guy that made a pretty spectacular one-handed catch a couple weeks ago against San Francisco that was, part of a big play. He's not an elite top-end receiver, but for a guy that can be a legit field stretcher and a legit, I can score from anywhere on the field type guy, Shaheed is 100% that. Their tight end, Juwan Johnson, is someone that is quickly, making waves or making a name for himself when it comes to the world of fantasy football. He is like the tight end, one of the 2 or 3 tight ends that probably wasn't drafted by many people in their fantasy drafts, who is now becoming someone that needs to be played just about every single week. And he is a beast. I mean, he looks like a monster over the middle. I'm not sure if his hands are quite that threatening in terms of being good at catching the football, but he is someone that absolutely, and especially when you look at the Bills and the general, lack of size they have at most positions in the back seven, Juwan Johnson's going to be open 100% of the time he's down the field, simply because he's going to be bigger and stronger than anyone who's near him. Doesn't mean the pass is going to get through, but he's a guy that the Saints can target. So when you look at the skill guys, like if you took those skill guys and put them in Buffalo, that'd be a pretty nasty group. It might arguably be better than the group the Bills have. So there is a threat there. Now, the quarterback for the Saints is Spencer Rattler, who, is not very big or very good at this point. He'll miss a handful of throws, but he has some moxie. He has some threat with his legs. He's going to be a guy who can make plays outside the pocket. I don't expect him to have much success as a very young starter against the Sean McDermott defense that usually just eats up young starters. But, the Bills have, I'll put it this way, the Bills have faced worse young quarterbacks, I think, over the last few years than what Spencer Rattler can bring. And then, they do have Curtis Granderson. I think that's the first name. I got to check it, actually, who has 3 sacks on the defensive line. And their pass rush is okay. It's, respectable enough. So, again, the Saints have some things but their secondary looks like trash. And they are the team that plays like they're supposed to be bad. I mean, they will do the dumb thing when, the dumb thing is the kind of thing that gets you beat. So, for example, they are number one this year in penalties taken, which, I mean, if there's ever a hallmark of a terrible team, it should be that. They've already had a punt block this year, one of 3 teams in the NFL to have that happened. And their kicker has already missed 3 kicks, 3 field goals. He's 4 of 7 this season. So they can't even, count on getting the 3 when they're able to move the ball, into scoring range. So, for any of the things that the Saints do well, there's still so many they do poorly, like most, bad 0-3 teams would, to really worry about them as a threat. And then when you add on the fact of the schedule that they're playing these couple of weeks here, last week they went all the way out to Seattle. So a cross-country trip, New Orleans to Seattle, went out there and got pounded, flew back to New Orleans, and now they're doing a cross-country trip the other way from New Orleans to Buffalo. That's a tough pair of back-to-back road trips if you take out the talent of any of the 3 teams involved. I mean, I don't care. Team X flying cross-country to Team Y and then flying cross-country again to Team Z is going to be bad for Team X. And I don't care what the names are in there. So this is kind of what you would call in the NBA like a scheduled loss. In the NBA, the schedule is so weird that sometimes you'll have teams play 3 games in 4 days on the road, and you'll play like a Thursday, take Friday off, they play a Saturday, Sunday, and the thought is that Sunday game when you're playing your 3rd road game in 4 days, like whoever the team is, they're just going to lose, just because there's no way the body can physically be ready to withstand what's on the other side. Carl Granderson, by the way, is the defensive lineman who has had a pretty good start to the year. 3.5 sacks so far, one of the better numbers in the NFL. So my apologies to Carl and his family. All that said, this is why this game against the Saints isn't much of a threat. If the Bills go out and do what they're supposed to do, if they, play enough coverages that should confuse a guy like Spencer Rattler, if they, make sure the Saints are the ones making the mistakes and not themselves, this is the type of game the Bills go out and win easily. I did do some research, by the way, last night on teams coming off a really bad loss because what was the score? I think 44-13 was the game last week. Yeah, 44-13. So Saints lost by 31 last week. I don't care how good you are. When you're a professional, that's the kind of thing that stings. That's the kind of thing that you do not take lightly. And you show up the next week wanting to prove that that's not really you. And the psychology of it, as logical as that might sound, I wanted to research last night. Okay, well, angry teams that just got pounded, how much does that motivation make a difference the next week? And as you might imagine, it doesn't make that much of a difference. I mean, teams who get pounded are usually bad teams, and bad teams usually continue to play bad. The stats are, over the last couple of years, there have been about 35 teams that have lost by 28 points or more. That's where I drew the line. And of those 35 or so teams, 2/3 lose again the next week. Now, 2/3 of those teams do cover the spread the next week. So if that's something that is of interest to you, putting some money on the Saints plus 16.5 or whatever it is right now, at least historically makes some sense. Now, again, when you add in all the different teams, I mean, a couple years ago, the Lions got blown out by Baltimore by 32. And so the Lions and a team like that is in the mix. But regardless, I think there's a little proof that you can expect a better effort the next week. Very few of those 35 teams got blown out again the following week, but it did happen a couple times. Regardless, though, this is not a game the Bills are going to lose, barring injury or some sort of catastrophic bit of turnover luck. So, look, as much as the Saints, and I can, I'm sure the Bills in the film room are trying to, pump them up to their guys and hey, watch out for this, watch out for that. This is not a team the Bills at home should ever lose to. So, last week we talked about with the Dolphins, I had 2 survivor pools. Do I use 1 or 2 picks on Miami? I ended up using both. This is another use the team the Bills are playing in both survivor pools week. The Saints are just not going to win this game. And I know, look, broadcaster jinx, watch out for that. No, this is not a game I'm worried about. This is a game the Bills should, 1,000,000% be able to handle because of a lot of the things that are happening on the Saints side, let alone with the Bills. All right, yesterday, or on Monday, I should say, we talked a little bit about Jackson Hawes and all the good things that he is doing. So, of course, me being enterprising reporter, I wanted to hear what the Bills had to say. Talked to David Edwards about Hawes yesterday. And let me tell you, for all the things that I've been saying about Hawes, David Edwards kind of topped all that in terms of how good Hawes has been so far this year.
He fires me up. Yeah. He is without a doubt the best blocking tight end I've ever seen. His ability to win one-on-one blocks on the edge, be in combination on outside zone, backside of zone plays is truly the best I've ever seen. So, and he works his tail off, really cares. Like, he's a great teammate, and he's going to play forever if he, continues blocking people like this.
I love the play forever comment. I mean, that is the perfect way to kind of underline what Spencer Hawes has been, so far this season and what he can be. The moment that Edwards said that to me yesterday, the first thing I thought of was, in the NBA, they've always said, if you can shoot a three, you'll play forever. Doesn't matter how big you are, how you defend. If you can make that shot, you're going to have a job. And what Jackson Hawes is doing is just about the NFL equivalent of it. If he can block like that as a tight end, I don't even care how good a receiver is. And he's been much better than expected so far. If you continue to do the things you can do as a blocker, someone is going to give you a job, like David Edwards said, for a long time, forever, when it comes to NFL terms about how long a guy can play. I mean, Jackson Hawes can be doing that kind of thing till he's 35, 36. He's going to retire a very wealthy man and might have 50 catches in his career total. But what that skill set is going to be ridiculously coveted. And he might stay in Buffalo his whole career for what he's been doing so far. More on what Edwards said there. He talked about being able to block the backside on an outside zone. So, for those of you that don't study every NFL term and watch film religiously like some of us do, that type of run is basically what has been called at times when the Broncos ran it a lot, a stretch run, because the quarterback is reaching out quite a bit to get to the runner. The Bills don't quite run it that far, but it will be a run the way the Bills operate it most of the time, where it looks like James Cook is being handed the ball to go either off tackle or around the outside. Not a pitch, but a handoff. And then usually what he does, he'll take one step after the handoff and then immediately cut it back and run it up the middle. Because what's happening in the play is that the offensive line is trying to move outside to just basically take the flow outside. And the idea of the play in general is to create a lane somewhere and let the running back read it. Outside, inside, or cut it back, or outside, straight ahead, or cut it back inside. And because teams have been running it for so long and defenses know how to combat it, the way it works is that generally the offensive line and the defensive line, they basically dance with each other all the way outside. And Cook will always cut it back in the middle. The trick to the play is the guys on the backside of the defensive line, the ends and the linebackers and maybe a corner over there, they generally don't, or I shouldn't say generally, they don't always get blocked. The idea is you want them to be holding at home, doing their job long enough for the running back to scoot inside of all the blocking happening to his left and fast enough to avoid the free man to his right. There are different ways to operate this, and one of the things the Bills have done with Hawes lately is you put him on that backside player. So that defensive end that's going away from the handoff, so the handoff goes left, the backside defensive end to the right, Hawes is blocking that guy by himself. And it's a tough block because it's you in space away from the play. So it's not like the running back is coming right behind you and you can just drive a guy forward and you're good. You kind of got to almost be able to dance with the player or control him. And Hawes does that so ridiculously well. One of the reasons that Edwards brought it up is it makes it so much easier for James Cook to hit that cutback, because you've got that backside locked up. You don't even care what happens on the front. The entire offensive line, the three quarters of the defensive line, everybody who's going out to the left with the initial flow of the play, all that stuff doesn't matter because Cook knows I'm going to cut back. 85's got that thing walled off. I'm just going to go, follow him. And it's been an incredible weapon for the Bills so far this year. Incredibly dependable. Because just about every time that 85 is on the field, Jackson Hawes has that covered. And that's just one part of what he does. So I had, it was fun to talk. I talked with Jackson Hawes a little bit yesterday. You can find that story on RochesterFirst.com. Jackson talked about blocking. We said, do you like it? He's like, it's fun. He said, not only is it fun, but most of the time the guys I'm blocking are like 30, 40 pounds heavier than me. And he's a big tight end. He's big for an NFL, a 2025 NFL tight end. He's like, it's a great challenge to be able to try and, block those guys. He kind of more or less compared it to a boxing ring. And man, that dude is winning a lot of fights with his share of knockouts too. So this is not the last time we're going to talk about a blocking tight end because he's been just that good. But I just wanted to update you with, what we got out of that story, yesterday in Buffalo. Another thing that David Edwards talked about yesterday, which I thought was very interesting, was his opinion of the Bills pregame ceremony. Now, I want to set this up a little bit with 5-6 years ago, before the Bills had Mr. Brightside as a thing during game days, before the Bills did the where else would you rather be with a former player, I would say that the Bills in-stadium experience might be one of the worst in the NFL, maybe the worst. Because you go around the league and there are so many fun traditions pregame, during the game. Most other teams do the TV timeouts better than they do in Buffalo in general. And don't get me wrong, it's a tough nut to crack to entertain someone who's there to watch football and is sitting through a 2-minute television timeout for the 8th time in a game. And what are you going to do? You play trivia with them. What teams like to do a lot is they'll record their players like on a Thursday. How many vegetables can you name in 30 seconds? And they play that on the screen. And, some teams do it better than others. And I think generally, I've seen better stuff out on the road than I've seen in Buffalo. But over the last few years, again, with the things the Bills, Mr. Brightside is cool. Now, it'd be cooler if the Bills had the guts to play it all the time, because in the Baltimore opener this year, they didn't play that thing till the game was over. Like, if you're going to have an in-game, like, song tradition like the Steelers do with the Renegade song, you got to be able to play that every single game. If you're only going to play it when your team's ahead, then you lose a couple points with that song. Regardless, Mr. Brightside is better what the Bills used to have, which was nothing. So that's better. But the pregame ceremony with the where else would you rather be, when the former players come out in the field and they do the hey, that's cool. But then when they start into where else would you rather be, and you could tell the crowd is just ready to explode, and then you hit the right here, right now, it's fantastic. And yesterday, David Edwards kind of proved that I'm not the only one who thinks so.
Every team stadium has their own start of the game thing. Every time I watch someone do the where else would you rather be, it gives me the chills. I don't know what it is. I think it's the coolest tradition in football.
All right, coolest tradition in football. That's saying something. So let's talk about that just for a minute here. I've been to all but 3 NFL stadiums in the NFL. So Arizona, San Fran, and the new Vegas stadium, the only teams I've not seen in person. I'm not really worried about Arizona having some pregame tradition that I'm missing. Raiders is new, so I don't know how much it qualifies as a tradition. And I'm just going to have to leave the Niners out of this because I've never been there. Among the other stadiums, there are a few that I think right now I would put ahead of where else would you rather be. Now, one of the big ones, and I think the number one pregame tradition in the league right now, is the Viking Skål chant. Now, they pulled that from, I think, an Iceland chant or something that they maybe for Iceland's hockey team or whatever. But, pregame, if you've seen it, all the fans, they get up and clap, and then they bring a celebrity in to, blow on what was a large, old style Viking horn. It is what Minnesota does in general with the U.S. Bank Stadium, to me, is number one in the NFL, and this is just one part of it. But I think that Skål chant, just the way that everybody gets into it, you've got the Viking horn, it's just a really cool building to begin with. That, to me, is the one that I would put number one right now. Behind that somewhere, in addition, the Chiefs Arrowhead chop is okay. It's a little borderline in terms of whether or not I think it's appropriate, but whatever, it's still a cool chant. Another really good one is the Tampa Bay Buck cannons. I mean, look, in the Buck Stadium, they have a pirate ship with functioning cannons. I mean, how do you beat that? That's really cool. And then in addition, they do a pregame video, which is kind of like a funny little spoof about the Bucks and their ship having a 1500s nautical battle with a ship named for the team that they're playing that day. It's really well done. It's funny. It's not hardcore serious. It's a funny thing. And then they blast off the cannon. So that's certainly in the top 5. Another really good one, and Bills fans may disagree just because who the team is, the JETS chant in Jets games is probably 1 or 2 or 3 in the league. Only because, here's the thing, all the other traditions in the league, right? The Bills, they bring back a celebrity to do the where else would you rather be, a former player. The Vikings, they have the horn, they bring a celebrity in. The Bucks have the cannons, even the Chiefs with the arrowhead chop, they bring a former player back in to do it. When the Jets do JETS, there's no special graphics, there's no video, there's no celebrity that comes in, there's no former player. They just show Fireman Ed, and I think most of you out there know who Fireman Ed is. He's the famous Jets fan who leads this thing. They put Fireman Ed on the screen a couple minutes before the game starts, and then he quiets the crowd. So of all the things that happen in these stadiums, everybody's getting excited to fire up. There's already a level of noise, and then it just increases for where else would you rather be, the chance, whatever. With the JETS, when Fireman Ed comes out, the whole crowd shuts up. I mean, absolutely like silence. Maybe not quite pin drop silence, but really like ridiculously quiet for a stadium. And then he just does the JETS thing, and the whole crowd goes bananas for it. So to get into this list with like no help from technology or celebrities or anybody special, here's a dude in the stands, we're going to do it, that ranks highly for me. But what the Bills do with where else would you rather be, 100%. There's no team in the league, in my opinion, in the last 3-4 years that has gone from meh in terms of their in-stadium experience to wow than the Bills with the where else would you rather be. Because again, when Bills fans punch the right here, right now, that is easily on the current Mount Rushmore of in-stadium NFL experiences right now. Maybe not easily. I think there can be an argument there, but it is really, really high. And for David Edwards to say he thinks it's the best in the league, is he glazing the fans a little bit? Yeah, maybe. Okay, fine. But this is also a guy, this is his 7th year in the NFL. So he's assumably seen it all. I didn't check his career history to see if he's been to every stadium, but whatever, 7 years, you've seen a lot. He played his college football at Wisconsin. So that means he saw Ohio State and Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska. I mean, a number of religious Big Ten universities, I'm sure with some fantastic pregame ceremony of their own. And to put Buffaloes on top, I thought was saying something. So I thought it was a pretty cool thing, and you want to talk about that a little bit as someone who's been to some different stadiums and who is very, very impressed with what the Bills have done lately. All right, one more Bills take here, and I want to start this by showing something that happened during the Sean McDermott press conference yesterday. So during the press conference, all of us who have a camera, we're plugged into one box. So essentially, for those of you who aren't TV or video or technology knowledgeable, Sean McDermott will be at one end of the room, and anyone else who's talking on a microphone that's plugged into a wire that essentially is connected to a system that connects to a box in the back of the room, and then all of us with cameras just plug into that box, and we get the good quality microphone sound from there. So this works, 99 times out of 100, but yesterday was one of the 1 out of 100 times. So in the middle of the press conference, or during the entirety of the first part of the press conference, the sound wasn't great. And then in the middle, suddenly the Sean McDermott sound dropped out totally. So we're all in the back of the room while the press conference is going on, trying to whisper to each other what we think might be wrong, how to fix it quickly, because if we don't get that thing figured out in 8 minutes, everything Sean McDermott says is going to be useless to all of us in television. So me being one of the senior people was more or less nominated or volunteered to go up and try and just replace the microphone. Sometimes, when you have a microphone problem, it sounds silly. The old school Nintendo cartridge where you pull it out, blow it on, and put it back in, and it's fine. It can be that simple sometimes. So the theory was, if I can unplug the microphone that Sean McDermott is talking on and plug it back in, maybe that'll fix it. McDermott had a very interesting reaction to what happened. Here's when it happened yesterday. As you can see, frantically trying, hoping this works, knowing that the entire fate of everyone's press conference is relying on my work right now.
Yeah. I was just at the dentist yesterday. I kind of felt like I was back at the dentist's office again.
So a super funny moment. By the way, I said back to Sean, I said, Sean, I don't know how to take that. And that was the second McDermott laugh. The reason I want to point that out, not to pat myself on the back for fixing the microphone, whatever. That is just another example of the new version of Sean McDermott. The guy who is, much more comfortable in his skin, much more relaxed, someone with a much, easier just kind of approach to life, and it's been fun to see him develop into this guy. Because when McDermott started as a coach in the NFL with the Bills, as a head coach, he just did not either have the willingness or the ability to really connect as a person. Not well, at least. It was early on in his career, it was painful at times to talk with him or to see him talking with other people outside of the press conference setting or outside of the player setting. And, while he, certainly there was some improvement, say years 2 to 5, nothing like what you'd see yesterday, where, he would see a situation where a microphone is breaking down and make a legitimately funny joke about it. It's a change that I think a lot of people have talked about quite a bit, and something that's been noticed and referred to, especially, following that Tyler Dunn article a couple years ago that really, was almost a takedown article of Sean McDermott. And, the way he, acted and the way he kind of handled himself in a number of various situations. Since then, it seems like there's been a concerted effort from McDermott to change his image to the point where he's doing, clothing photos, something that Isaiah McKenzie kind of, poked fun at on X in a fun way, in a I appreciate my coach kind of way. Look at him stepping out of his comfort zone kind of way. Those are all examples of, the new Sean McDermott, the guy that, again, is just, much more willing to, make a joke like that yesterday, and just, willing, I think, to, connect. Maybe not, I don't know if willing is the word or able, but it's one of the two, maybe some combination of both. He's just better at it. He's, more of a regular person. And players have talked about this too. There's I believe on Fridays, they do Dad Joke Day, where Sean McDermott is the one that, provides the joke at the beginning of team meetings. So, this is a guy that just in general has, grown as a person. And I know that a lot of people look at Sean McDermott as the head coach that's either responsible for or responsible for holding the Bills back from winning a Super Bowl. And that's all that matters. For me, for someone who deals with these players on a weekly basis for 6 months out of the year, and coaches for that matter, not necessarily on a, handshake, standing next to them on a sideline kind of way, but certainly as one of the many media who on a regular basis is asking questions, who's, trying to, learn things, get information, at times asking tough questions. You do get to know these guys on a personal level. And then it goes for McDermott and a lot of players too. I want to say that I have been very, very happy to see Sean McDermott move in this direction. Not because we get jokes out of him and it's fun, because it just feels like it's better for him, that he is more enjoying himself. He is living a better life. The Bills talk all the time about, being your best version of yourself. This to me looks like the best version that we have ever gotten of Sean McDermott. And I think there's, a hope and an expectation that he will continue to progress in this way. Now, there's no doubt that the Bills' success on the field is probably playing a part here. I mean, this is a guy that, since that article came out 2 years ago, ran off a bunch of wins, made a playoff spot that was a little bit unexpected. Last season, in a year that a lot of us thought would be kind of a rebuilding year, was able to win 14 games, go to an AFC championship when a lot of us didn't expect it. And then this year, the Bills have started off 3-0 and look very much like the best team in the NFL. So things are certainly, it's all coming up Millhouse for Sean McDermott right now. There's no doubt about that. And that's certainly a part of this. But this is not something that's born of winning. This appears to be, and from most accounts, is something born of just Sean McDermott making a concerted effort to approach things different, taking a different attitude with the way he conducts himself in a job. And on a human point of view, again, as someone who's there a lot, who has seen him a lot, I'm just happy for him. I'm happy that this is where he's landed, because this job he does is about as hard as you get in the world. Especially with the team he's on, the only credit that Sean McDermott's going to get is for winning a Super Bowl. Everything short is a miss, is a loss, is a failure. And to do that job, that also requires a ridiculous work week. A job where the employees and the people who do it, the 32 guys in the league who hold this job, all feel like that every available minute of the week is a minute they should be working on finding a new edge, some other way to win. It makes for a really tough life, even if it is a well-compensated, famous one. And it's a life that's eaten up a lot of men over the years. And for Sean McDermott to reach a point where it doesn't appear to be treating him that way, where he's able to laugh about it, make jokes about it, to be open, to be friendly, to step out of his comfort zone to where he's doing, clothing ads. Me as a human being who sees him on a regular basis, I'm very happy for him. And I'm excited for, what that might mean. Is it going to mean he's going to be more likely to win a Super Bowl? I don't know. I think it helps. I would think feeling better about life in general is good. We all probably want to strive for that, right? But either way, whether he wins a Super Bowl or not, I'm just glad that the guy that I see on a regular basis, who I know has the weight of the world upon him, a weight that sometimes he asks for, can still laugh and make a joke when the microphone in front of him breaks down. That he can look at the small things around him and still, have a smile on his face and enjoy it. Because what he does is really hard. What a lot of us do is really hard. But especially Sean McDermott. And I know from where he started on this team, it's been a journey to get here. And there has to be some personal effort, some work behind the scenes to get him to the point where he feels comfortable being the guy that we saw making a joke about that microphone yesterday. And I hope it continues. And I hope he finds that this is something that works best for him, whether he's in Buffalo for 20 years or whether the Bills move on for some reason and he goes somewhere else. All right, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about baseball and the playoffs and why I should be really excited for them. I generally am not. And why all y'all baseball fans out there, you might be getting ready for a way different style of league coming to your screens very soon. Talk about that after this. You're watching the Endgame here on Rock One. We're back after a break. Ted Brown back here with you on the Endgame. I want to remind you, as always, please check out BKL Nightly. We are up there all the time, 8:30 tonight on Rock One here. We will also have a test of the video headline. Look at that. Look at that great headline. Also, BKL Nightly, man. You'll love it. Every Monday through Thursday at 8:30 p.m., we will wrap you up everything that happened during the day in the world of the Buffalo Bills. One other NFL take I want to fire off here quick before we get to the baseball stuff. The kickoff rule, brand new, to last year. And one thing that, if you watch especially Rams and Eagles over the weekend, is that the Rams have kind of perfected a little cheat code to the NFL kickoff rule. They will squib kick it, and they really ruin the Eagles in terms of being able to handle it. And this is something I talked about on X after the first game of the year, because the Ravens do it this way too. And I don't think we should be surprised that of all organizations, the Ravens and the Rams have found a great ingenuitive way to handle a new rule. What I mean by squib kicking is the way the rules work. If you kick the ball straight in the end zone, it's a touchback out to the 35. That's bad. If you kick a ball that lands before the 20, it's essentially a touchback out to the 40. Also bad. So kickoff teams do not want to do either one of those things. So what they're doing, everybody is doing, is trying to land a kick as far back, as far close to the goal line as you can without going into the end zone, and then kind of defending the kickoff from there. It's what the Bills do. It's what a lot of teams do. What the Rams and the Ravens have been doing, and I think other teams have been too, is instead of popping one up in the air, because hang time doesn't matter for kickoffs anymore. It doesn't matter how long the ball's in the air. No one can move until the ball is touched, whether you hit a low line drive or whether you hit a ball, off a satellite or something. So kicking it high doesn't help you. It's about where the receiving team gets the ball, or with the squib kick, how easily they can field the ball. Because one of the difficulties of the squib kick is that you've got an oblong ball bouncing a number of different directions, and you have two return men back there, but as the Eagles proved, it's sometimes very difficult to make a catch in that play. So by hitting a squib kick, you might give the return team a chance to start with the ball at the 10 or the 15 as opposed to the 5 or the 3, but they got to field the ball first. If they don't field the ball and the ball goes into the end zone, then the touchback comes out to the 20. So while you might be giving up 3 or 4 yards of field position for a return man not catching the ball so deep, you've got a chance to just, if you can hit a ball that bounces weird and gets past the guys into the end zone, you've just saved yourself 10 or 15 yards of field position. And then even if they don't get the ball, the kickoff, to go into the end zone, those return men can still have trouble fielding the ball to where, once they get a piece of it, I believe you are released, now it becomes a fumble. So, and even if the return men pick it up, now they don't have a running head start. The entire return, at least the script of it, the scheme of it, is kind of ruined. So this makes a whole lot of sense for making things really hard on the return team. And the numbers back it up, because the Rams right now, a team that's used this all the time, have the lowest opposing field position start average, if you followed all that, after kickoffs. Right now, teams who are receiving kickoffs from the Rams start on average with the ball at their 21-yard line. The next closest team is the 25. So the Rams are winning this by 3 yards and almost 4 yards. And to me, this is the way this rule is going to go. Teams can try the pop-up all they want. It really doesn't do anything other than, maybe being a little more accurate and placing the ball 5-10 yards deeper down the field. To me, the squib kick is, if you can master it, is the best way, because you do get the opportunity to push a team all the way back to the 20. You do get the opportunity to totally ruin a kickoff if a team can't handle the squib. And that's much more valuable, even if the team handles the squib and they catch the ball at the 10-yard line. Because even then, the return man can't get a running start knowing exactly where the ball is going to land, because you got to be careful and kind of field it like a shortstop, making sure it doesn't get past you. So the Ravens did it week 1. The Rams have been doing it all year. I think it's only a matter of time before every team in the NFL is approaching the kickoff this way. And I've liked the kickoff rule too. Frankly, I was someone who was fine if we just took the kickoff out of the game and just said everybody can start with the ball at the 30 and we go. I would have been okay with that. I didn't mind the idea that touchdowns happen and I can skip the point after and the kickoff and kind of, take a 3-minute break and come back to the game, when the next play from scrimmage is. But this, if you were someone who wanted the kickoff back in the game, this was the right way to do it, because the kickoff is back. It's fun. We've already had 2 returns for a touchdown this year. Keep in mind, in 23, before they went dynamic kickoff, there were 4 kickoff returns for touchdowns the entire season. And we've had 2 already this year. There were 7 last year. So the league right now, the average is already ahead of that pace too. It's the right rule. The Rams and Ravens are going about it the right way. And like I said, I think it's only a matter of time before you see everybody in the league approaching their kickoffs with probably a squib style. There is some risk to it, because the Ravens rookie kicker, he's hit it out of bounds or he's been short of the 24 times. That's a lot of times where you're just handing a team the ball at the 40-yard line. And with teams being able to get their kicking balls in preseason and kind of work them and, grease them up however they want, they're able to the guys. One of the reasons that there have been a lot of long field goals made this year is because teams can essentially juice their own kicking balls. So if you're a team kicking off and you mishit a squib and it either goes out of bounds before the end zone or lands before the 20, and you put your opponent on the 40-yard line, it's basically 1 first down and they're in field goal range. So there is some risk to the squib rule. Regardless, I still think everybody's going to go down this road very, very soon. All right, so we are blue and yellow behind me today for my Brewers, who are 1 win or a Phillies loss away from clinching the #1 overall seed in the baseball playoffs. They'll have the best record in the regular season and home field for first round, second round, and the World Series. They already have a bye. And as a Brewers fan, it's been fun to watch them win this division and make the playoffs over and over and over. I think this is going to be their 7th playoff appearance in 8 years. And for a team that's not in New York, Chicago, or LA, that's a heck of an accomplishment. And while it's fun to watch the Brewers, I'm not really excited about the playoffs. I'll watch them. I'll definitely watch some of the games. I mean, even that first round best of 5, I'll watch a few of them, because most of us who are Brewers fans, we know how this story is going to end. You can be competitive in the regular season, but when you get to the playoffs and it's LA and it's Philly and maybe even the Cubs this year, at some point, one of those teams with a whole lot more resources and a whole lot more star players are going to be too much for a team like Milwaukee. Now, just from a baseball point of view, this Brewers team, I think, is probably the best they've had going to the playoffs. Their offense is relentless. They do have an opportunity to kind of stun the world and get to a World Series, maybe even win it, better than a lot of their other teams have had. But I'm still not excited about it. And the numbers, back me up, because for years, for decades, the payroll disparity in baseball has been holding back teams like the Brewers. Last 10 years, here are the numbers. Out of the 20 teams who made the World Series over the last 10 years, only 2 have come from the bottom 10 in payroll. Brewers, by the way, this year are 23rd in total payroll in Major League Baseball. And they're not a team that, some teams get accused of cheaping out, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The Brewers are not that team. They really go out and make the effort to make use of whatever resources they have. But history says, as good as they've been this year, they've got a 10% chance of even making the World Series. Now, if you just take the bottom half of teams in payroll, 16 through 30, only 5 of those teams have been to the last 10 World Series. So you've got 1/4 of the World Series teams, participants, being accounted from of half the league in terms of payroll. 25% of the teams come from the 50% at the bottom half of payroll. It's terrible. That's a significant economic disadvantage. If you're in the top 50% of payroll, you've got a 3 out of 4 chance to go to the World Series, or 3/4 of the teams who've been to the World Series have come from the top 50% in payroll. Overall playoff teams, it's better. There's 12 teams. You've got a better chance to make the playoffs. And when you're a team like Milwaukee or Cleveland or Detroit, and you play in central divisions that are generally heavier stacked with lower payroll teams, you've got an opportunity to make the playoffs. And the Brewers have also been a really good organization. They've done a good job of taking advantage of different inefficiencies, in other words, they do things smarter and better than most teams. And when you get to play Pittsburgh and Cincinnati 12 times, and you get, 6 with Tampa and 6 with Colorado and 6 with the White Sox, over the course of a season, because you're run better, you're going to build up enough wins to make a lot of playoff spots. Not all the time. You got to be good at it, but, there's an easier path to qualifying for the playoffs when you only have to be, 12 of 30, and you can do it taking advantage of teams that just are way less well-run than you. So there's an opportunity to make the playoffs. Even then, though, the bottom third, the bottom 10 teams in payroll have accounted for only 22% of the playoff spots. So even then, making the playoffs is still tilted towards the teams that have more money. Now, obviously, we've proven here that having more money helps, or spending more money, I should say, at the very least. And most teams that spend more money, it's because they have more money. How often do teams have the opportunity to spend money, or how often is it the same teams? Well, over the last 10 years, 2/3 of the bottom 10 and top 10 spots in payroll. So we'll take 10 seasons. Each year, there's 10 teams who are in the bottom 10 in payroll. 10 times 10 is 100. Of those 100 spots in the bottom 10 of payroll, 2/3 of them come from the same 8 teams. Similarly, in the top half of payroll, same 100 spots, 2/3 of those spots come from the same 8 teams. And you can name them all too. Giants, Yankees, Dodgers, Mets, Cubs, Angels, all those teams, Boston, the teams that you would expect. And this year it's the same way. You look at the baseball playoffs, and the teams that are already in the playoffs for the most part are, basically every airport where you change planes. It's New York, it's Boston, it's Toronto, it's Philly, it's LA, it's Chicago. All the hub airports have teams that are already in the baseball playoffs. It's not a coincidence because, the way baseball's economics are stacked up, it favors the teams that have, bigger payroll. Well, where does this bigger payroll come? Well, for the most part, maybe not for the most part, but a large chunk of it comes from teams who have larger cable revenue contracts. So all of you at home who watch the Yankees on Yes or the Mets on SNY, those networks that are owned by those teams are able to generate more revenue because of the teams that they show on a regular basis than if you're Milwaukee or Cleveland or Kansas City. The most recent resources or research, from teams' cable deal contracts, and these are from, you don't get it year by year because teams have to report this stuff, and it's hard to, this is, I don't want to say protected information, but certainly not information teams are just going to volunteer. It's not like you can run out to, Baseball Reference and see how much the Brewers spent on their payroll last year. So the details on, if you go out and research it, we're talking about 2022, 2023, the most recent year when we know exactly what teams made from cable revenue. All that said, in general, the Brewers and the Indians the Guardians and the Royals of the world, they make between 30 and 50, 60 million on their cable deals a year. Seems like a really big number, right? Well, the Yankees make nearly 200 million. I'm sorry, the Dodgers make nearly 200 million. The Yankees make 145 or so million. Cubs are near 100 million. Philly's over 100 million. So, right off the bat, those bigger market teams, they have an advantage of 50 to 70 million per year in cable revenue. And whether, you think that is the only reason why teams win, the correlation is hard to dispute. Because the teams with the bigger payrolls are the ones who almost always end up standing up at the end when it comes to the World Series. Only 2 times, again, in the last 10 years, has a team outside the top 20 in payroll even made it to the World Series, and never has one of those teams won. Only one team outside of the top half in payroll has won a World Series. So when you're the Yankees or the Mets and you get to be in New York, or if you're the Dodgers or the Angels and you get to sell TV rights to giant markets like that, you're able to pull in 50 to 60 to 70 extra $1 million, and you have a big advantage. Now, baseball does have revenue sharing, and it does flatten the difference. It does flatten the curve to a degree, but not nearly enough to make a difference. And history proves that if you don't have the big money, you're probably not going to be going to a World Series. And as much fun as it's been as a Brewers fan to watch them make the playoffs every year, when I have a pretty strong confidence that playoff run is going to end before the World Series, and that they won't really have a chance to lift the trophy at the end, it's hard to get really super excited for it. I mean, ask a Bills fan. How many Bills fans out there, they might appreciate to a degree all the success the Bills have had the last 5-6 years. But if it doesn't eventually come with the Super Bowl, it's going to be disappointing. At least with Bills fans, you go to the playoffs thinking, well, if they win 3 games, this might be the year. With the Brewers, yeah, they might have to win, 3, 4, 11 games. But there's just too much payroll standing in Milwaukee's way to get all the way to a championship. So for the last couple of decades, no matter how good the Brewers have been, or most other small market teams, I know where that path is going to end, and it's going to be not in the World Series and not with a championship. And there are people out there who will, yell and scream about, well, owners should spend more money, which, and Joe Sheehan is one of the top ones. He's a really smart analytics guy who, always will kind of slough off this argument that baseball's economic disparity is a problem by saying, well, the other owners who are all billionaires, and they are, all 30 of them are, why don't they just spend more money? Well, it's not that easy. Why should the owners that own Tampa or Miami or Milwaukee or Cleveland spend themselves to a deficit to stay competitive with the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Angels, who can have big payrolls and still turn a profit? One of the biggest problems with revenue sharing is that once you're a team that accepts revenue sharing, you are essentially no longer allowed to turn a profit. No matter how good your in-season promotions were, or how good a job you did attracting attendance for the season, or even how good your team was, surprisingly, that helped with all those things, the moment you turn a profit, well, you've been a cheap owner that's pocketed the revenue sharing. That you've been given this handout from major league teams, and you kept it because you're a greedy owner. You don't care about winning. I mean, there's no economic way. There's no way to verify that. If you take $30 million in revenue sharing and report a $15 million profit, then everybody in the world will say, well, you should have spent that $15 million on better players. And it's not fair. And I know, it's hard to feel sympathy for a billionaire, but put yourself in that person's place. If you're one of the 30 owners in baseball and you're there, because you want to own a team, but also because you want to turn a profit, and you're one of the owners of a small market team that receives revenue sharing, do you not take the revenue sharing so you can turn a profit and have an even worse team? Or do you take the revenue sharing, try and make your team a little bit better? Not that everybody does it, but try and make the team a little bit better, and then turn a profit because you had a sound year economically as a business? I mean, you're all going to choose, number 2. So to criticize these owners for, keeping the money as a blanket statement, I've always thought was short-sighted, because you're not being fair to the owners who have legitimately made this purchase to turn a profit. And there's just no right answer, when you're a small market team. And no matter what answer you give, that small market team is still behind the 8 ball from the moment the playoffs begin. So again, for the last 15, 20 years, I kind of roll my eyes at the baseball playoffs because it's basically the New York, LA, Boston, Chicago Invitational. And I know there have been a lot of other teams that have won championships, and you don't have to be a top 10 payroll to win a championship, but you can't be a bottom 10 payroll, and that's still a problem. The thing is that problem might soon be going away because, like I said, one of the primary drivers of revenue of economic disparity is cable contracts for individual teams. The fact that the Yankees can put all their games on YES during a summer and make, nearly $200 million on it is a huge advantage. But in the world of television and media, cable TV is one of the things that's kind of slowly crumbling. That's why you're watching me on this channel right now. Streaming is the way to go. And streaming does not right now have a YES or an SNY or an opportunity to land revenue to kind of, locate dollars from a baseball point of view from a cable company like teams were doing, to the point where next season there are 7 teams that are going to have their games produced by Major League Baseball. And I don't know all the economics of it, but it's not a team going out and making their own cable deal. It's basically having baseball produce the games for them. And I think what's going to happen is baseball is going to pull in one giant number, and I'm sure there'll be some sort of agreement, but it's not like a team going out. It's not like the Yankees going to YES and getting $200 million because YES needs the programming. It's a whole different economic world. And as a result, because of this happening more and more, remember, it wasn't too long ago that there was a Fox Sports, Chicago, LA. They were everywhere. Then there was a Bally Sports. Now there's a FanDuel Sports. All those regional networks are struggling just as much as cable is. So what's the future for baseball? Well, it's a great question. One of the things that Rob Manfred has talked about wanting to do is to centralize all the revenue that's come from games. Basically similar to what the NFL does, just with 162 games in a season, not 17. Well, it's going to be hard for the big market teams that have had this big advantage and have had this giant check written to them every year to agree to become one of 30 under the same umbrella. But again, they may not have a choice because cable TV may not exist in 5 or 10 years, certainly not in the way we see it now. So what does baseball do? Well, like I said, Manfred wants to bring it all under the same umbrella, wants to make it centralized. So when they sell media rights to their games, it's going to be about all 30 teams for all season, not just a Sunday night package and a playoff package and something here and there. Well, that's not going to be easy for the big market teams to stomach. Why should the Yankees give up their $200 million or the Dodgers give up their $200 million a year check and share that money now with the Tampas and the Miamis and the Athletics of the world? It's not going to be something they're going to agree to easily. So that, maybe there's an agreement that you make in there where the Dodgers get a little more of the pie. But then how do you convince the small market teams to do that? Because, essentially from this point of view, if they're one of 30, they should be treated on the back end, on the profit side, as one of 30. It's a really big problem that baseball is going to be facing really soon. Manfred, there's a great article in the Washington Post. I recommend you read it. Manfred talked about, the current broadcast agreement, I think, expires in 2028. So that's about the timeline for when this is all going to change, or when at least he wants it to change. And this is why you're hearing the term salary cap get thrown around in baseball again. Something that the players have spent years making sure would never come to baseball might be back because baseball doesn't have a choice. Or at least the owners might attempt to, institute it, because there's not going to be a situation where the Dodgers and the Yankees can hand out these $800 million long-term contracts as easily because their revenue stream is going away. Or one of their big ones is. And this is why there might be a work stoppage soon. So one of the small benefits of this, for me as a fan of a small market team, is that this might force baseball to further equal the playing field. That the idea of the Yankees and Dodgers grabbing all this extra revenue because they have a sweet cable deal to bring in more all-stars, more players, and have more resources might have to go away because there just is no more revenue stream to grab it from. Now, maybe, one of the things I thought of, does Netflix become the Yankee, Dodger, Met, Angel network, and they show all the games during the summer? Maybe. But either way, baseball has, and I don't think it's been discussed enough, has a giant fork in the road staring them in the face. And it's not 10 years down the road, it's probably 2, about how they continue to make money the way they were, in the format they were, without giving everything up. and without having to, have a lockout or some sort of work stoppage in the interim, because the players are just like, we've never had a salary cap before. Why should we have one now? I'm not even sure what side I'm on with this, other than I do hope that at the end of the day, when we get to 2030, if the Brewers are still a very successful organization, as they have been the last few years, that maybe the system will be in place that allow them to compete. But it's going to be really interesting to see how baseball navigates all this over the next few years, and how they, bring large owners that have had a great advantage when it's come to not only their competitiveness, but their ability to make money, how you bring them under the same tent, if at all, with the small market owners who have not had that advantage, to be able to keep the game as sustainable and as profitable as it has been. And then you've got the third group of the players who need to still feel like they're getting enough of the pie themselves to be able to be on board whatever the changes are. And again, those changes, they might be pretty massive. So interesting times coming for baseball. And also, interesting postseason coming up too, right? I do think the Brewers have a good shot here. Like I said, they're a pretty good team. I think right this second, I'd probably pick the Phillies. I'm going to go Phillies. I had to go against the Guardians, man. They're so good lately. I'm going to go Phillies Blue Jays in the World Series right now. See if that's right. All right, we'll be back on Monday. Special guest on Monday, by the way. Greg Connors will be in from Connors and Ferris. He's the training camp sponsor. We'll talk about camp and the Bills. I'm sure we'll talk about Bills Saints too. I'm Thad Brown. You're watching Rock One. Catch you later.
Get the Rochester First streaming app today for everything you love from News 8 On Demand, plus exclusive shows you won't see anywhere else. Search ROC and download for free on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV.